It's been a week since I escaped the hospital. I've been sneaking into town at night for food and supplies, but it's getting hard. Last night I saw Adam and his goons patrolling the town with the sheriff. I'm almost certain they know where I'm laying low, but no one's come looking for me. Tonight, I'm moving to a new spot. There's an old pumpkin farm near the reservoir out on the south end of the town. The house burned down, but the barn's still standing. It's a 2-hour walk through the woods. With any luck, I get there before midnight. From the moment I left the house, I had a feeling that something was up. It was dead quiet. Normally, I could hear the traffic from the highway along with everything else around me. No crickets, no owls, not even a dog barking in the distance. Yeah, it was messing with my head. Since there were no trails leading the way, I made sure to keep the town on my left. Passing silently through the dark, I kept thinking about Carter. Why couldn't I remember him? What happened to him? For that matter, what happened to me? What did they do to make me forget? The more I thought about it, the less I knew. It was giving me a headache. Stopping to rest for a second, I sat on a downed tree and tried to clear my mind. I hadn't realized how long I had been walking. I could hear the reservoir. Smiling to myself, I took a deep breath and stood up. As I turned to walk away, the snap of a dry twig stopped me. Trying not to make any sudden moves, I slowly shifted my attention over to my right shoulder to look back. The shuffling of dry leaves and the slight rustling sound made my heart drop. Swallowing the lump in my throat, I reached for my knife and braced myself for whatever happened next. Pulling my blade, while turning to face the sound, I stood my ground and wound up in a stare-off with the biggest, ugliest skunk I'd ever seen. It was staring me down with its tail sticking straight up. We were maybe 10 feet away from each other, and I could smell it. I don't know how I could have missed that stink, but it was too late now. I slowly took a step back, and it took a step forward. Shit. The last thing I wanted to do is get sprayed, but this little bastard had hate in his eyes. It charged, and I jolted back. I guess it took that as a sign of aggression. Next thing I know, I'm gagging, half blinded by the skunk spray. Trying not to puke, I stumbled around tripping over branches, but it wasn't over. I could hear the fucker running towards me. It zooms in and bites my shin. On a reflex, I kick it as hard as I can and send it sailing through the air. It smacked against a tree and came down on its feet. At this point, my vision was just clear enough to see it racing towards me again. Still half blinded, I tried to run and got blasted a second time. I wasn't turning back. I ran all the way to the reservoir and dove in. When I surfaced, it was pacing back and forth on the rocks waiting for me. It stayed for a few seconds before finally scurrying back into the woods. Once I was back on shore, I made my way to the old barn. There was a rusted chain with a padlock securing the doors, but there was a hole near the bottom big enough for me to slide under. The inside was just as worn down as the outside, but it would do. I eventually fell asleep on the overlook. I'm not sure how long it was before I heard someone whistling a familiar tune. It was a faint at first, but it woke me. The more I listened, I realized what it was. The theme song from Inspector Gadget. Glenn used to whistle it to himself when he was nervous. I smirked a little thinking about it, then I remembered Adam saying they'd buried an empty coffin. As silly as it sounds, I had to know for sure. Doing my best to get a look, I peeped through the wall slats, but I didn't see anyone. The whistling got closer and closer, and stopped. There was a long moment of silence, then quick footsteps as someone hurried away. When the sun came up, I gathered my things and went down to the reservoir. The water wouldn't get rid of the smell, but it was better than nothing. After an hour, it was obvious I was going to need some fresh clothes. The closest place was the trailer park, and it was a short walk, and with any luck, I'd find some there. On the way, I kept thinking about that tune. It had to be a coincidence, but in the back of my mind, I needed to know. Lost in my own little world, I made it to the trailer park in no time. It hadn't changed much. There were a few newcomers, but it was still a dump. From the bushes, I could see the front door of a double-wide. There was a truck parked out in the front with bags under the bed. My plan was to snatch one and run out, but before I could make my move, the door opened. An older guy strode out, got in the truck and drove off. A minute or two later, a dark-haired woman came out and sat on the steps. She sat there for a second, then pulled out a pack of smokes and lit one up. I figured since my shot at clothes just drove off, I'd just burn one and be on my way. Trying not to look too out of place, I casually walked over and sort of waved to get her attention. Giving me a slight smile, she nodded and said good morning. We made small talk, and I capped it off by asking her for a cigarette. As she handed it over, she looked at me and stopped. Victor? I instantly put my head down. I knew she looked familiar, I just couldn't place it. The moment she said my name, I knew who she was. Kate Jacobs. She was just a few years older than me. She graduated high school my freshman year. We'd only met a few times. I was surprised she remembered me. Taking a long drag, she shook her head. I hadn't noticed that until that moment, how much older she looked. It didn't make sense. Some of her hair was turning gray, and the H-lines on her face were out of place. Looking me over, she smiled. I can't believe how much you look like him. A little stumped by the sadness in her tone, I asked, who was she talking about? And tears came to her. Carter. I remember the day they took him away. Everyone says it didn't happen, but I remember. Don't you? Her jaw dropped when I told her I had almost no memory of him. After inviting me inside and spraying me with Lysol, she got out a scrapbook filled with photos. She'd grown up with Carter. I was actually in some of the pictures. When she got to a photo of a group of kids standing in front of the school, she stopped. This was the day. Handed me the picture and, lighting another cigarette, she let out a sigh. Everyone was in the auditorium. I can't remember why. Carter was 2 people ahead of me in line. When it was his turn, the school nurse looked him over, then set him down. After a few minutes, Dr. Monroe came over and spoke with the nurse. They stood him up and walked him out. I remember thinking how strange it was. When it was my turn, a different doctor came in and I was taken to the nurse's office. I saw Carter one last time on the way there. He was on a stretcher, being carried by guys in scrubs. Dr. Monroe was there talking to you and your parents. I remember that because your dad was crying while your mother was signing something. I stopped her right there. My dad never cried. I couldn't even imagine what he would look like. When I questioned her about it, she said she was sure because she waved to me while I was sitting next to him. With a tremble in her voice, she did her best not to break down crying. I waited in the nurse's office for a long time before the doctor came in. She gave me a shot that made me sleep. When I woke up, I was at my home in my bed. 2 months later, I found out I was pregnant. I swore up and down that I hadn't done anything. I was a virgin. I didn't understand what was happening to me. Thought I was going crazy. And it got so bad that they sent me to the hospital and kept me there till the baby was born. They took it. They never let me see it. I can still hear it crying. I can still hear all of them crying. She went on to tell me that she'd given birth to 3 more children over the next few years, but the last was stillborn. The damage it caused left her unable to have more. That's when they hooked her up to a machine. From what she described, the machines were the ones they hooked me up to. When I asked her what they were there for, she got up from her seat and went to get something from the other room. She came back carrying one of those vials. It's for this. Popping off the lid, she smirked at me and drank the fluid. The gray in her hair slowly turned back to its natural color, and her skin tightened, making her look closer to her real age. Tying her hair back, she laughed at the look on my face. They used children to make it. When people stopped having babies, they tried to use the teenagers, but it wasn't the same. People started flipping out. They would see things and go on killing sprees. After that, they stopped making it. In 2 years, close to the half of the town was either dying or dead. At some point, they started making it again, but it didn't work. It only lasts a few hours. Kate excused herself for a moment. When she came back from the kitchen, she was carrying a bottle of vodka and 2 cups. I smiled. A drink didn't sound half bad. As she poured it up, I started asking questions. So, who are they? You keep saying that like I'm supposed to know who you're talking about. Who's doing this? Taking a sip of her drink, she shrugged. I don't know, but people are saying they've been bringing in girls. I think they found a way to start over. Rolling through everything in my head, I took a swig of my drink and sat back. When I thought about it, the details didn't matter. I needed to find Sid and get her out of town. I'd deal with the rest later. I talked to Kate for close to an hour, and by the end of our conversation, the liquid had worn off. As the youth left her eyes and the gray crept through her hair, she told me about an old section of the hospital they used for storage. When she was there, her and a few of the other girls would go down there sometimes to smoke. There were no cameras, and security never came through. If I could get inside, I could get to Sid. I thanked her for the drink and bummed another smoke before I left. On the way out, she gave me a change of clothes and wished me luck. The hospital was a long way from the trailer park. I'd either have to cut through town or walk down the highway and go around. Cutting through town was a bad idea at best, but the highway wasn't much better, but it could work. It took a while to get there, but I wasn't in a rush. I stayed far enough from the road not to be seen and was making pretty good time until a SUV pulled off the road with its hazard lights flashing. I figured it was just somebody having a bad day and kept walking. Should have known better. As I passed, the door swung open, and out stepped Big Pete from the truck stop. Pulling a gun from his waistband, he motioned for me, then opened the rear passenger door. I already knew who was inside, but I also know I couldn't outrun a bullet. I stepped close enough to get a look, and, of course, it was Gordo. Before I got in, Pete took my knife and tossed my backpack into the woods. He gave Gordo my blade, then ordered me to get in. As the door slammed shut, Gordo drove the knife into my leg. Then, using his other hand, he smashed my face against a window. "Where is she?" he barked, driving the knife deeper. "Where is the girl? Take me to her. Now!" Keeping my face smashed against the glass, he pulled the knife out of my leg, then jammed the tip into the soft spot in my ear. "I'm going to say this one last time. Where is Sydney?" Without hesitation, I grunted out. "The people in this town are fucked up. They kidnapped us and took us to a hospital. I escaped. Sid didn't. And now I'm trying to get her out." Pulling the knife away and releasing me, Gordo sat back. "Why? Were they after you?" "Or the girl?" Between the throbbing pain in my leg and trying to stop the bleeding, I was having a hard time concentrating. I told him everything, and when I finished, he looked at me and nodded. Turning his attention to Pete, for a moment he tapped him on the shoulder and asked for his phone. Once he had it, Gordo smirked and handed it to me. "When you get to your room, call me." "My room? What are you—" Before I could finish the question, Gordo nodded to Pete, then something heavy slammed into my head and everything went black. When I woke up, I was in hospital bed. The stab wound had been stitched up, but I was in rough shape. Apparently, after Pete knocked me out, they beat the shit out of me. I've been unconscious for 13 hours. It took a minute to get my bearings and sit up. There was an old man on life support across the room from me. For a second, I wondered if he was on the drug. Shaking it off and slipping out of bed, I searched around till I found the plastic bag with my belongings in it. Pulling out the phone, I made the call, and Gordo picked up.